Hey everyone, this is the Garden of English, and I'm Tim Freitas. I hope you're living the dream, just not Nightmare on Elm Street. Anyway, let's get right into things today as we continue our look into producing strong literary argument essays.
Let's do this thing!
In my last video, that looks like this, we went over how to break down standard literary argument prompts and then turn them into questions that need to be answered throughout your essay. If you haven't seen that video, I recommend that you watch it before continuing here, just so you can know what is going on. You can actually find it linked right up in the description below this video. I want to take a moment right now to remind you of the prompt that my future examples in this video and the rest of this series will be responding to. It's derived from the Garden of English's Lit Support materials, and it's about to show up right on your screen. So, we've already attacked the prompt, but we need to know how to effectively answer it. And we're going to start this by exploring ways to generate a strong thesis statement. A strong thesis statement is the most important part of your paper. A thesis statement is the sentence or sentences that clearly concentrate your argument and guide your paper's line of reasoning. A thesis is often one sentence long and goes at the end of your introductory paragraph for your essay. But I need you to know that thesis statements can be multiple sentences, as we will soon see throughout this video, and they can actually be anywhere in an essay. I do recommend that they show up at the end of your intro paragraph when you engage in academic writing, however. Most, if not all, of your teachers will agree.
No way.
I'm serious. Just ask them. Anyway, while I go through this video, I'm going to offer you multiple thesis templates that you can choose to use based on your skill level. As the video goes on, the thesis templates will become increasingly more complex. You also need to know that these templates can work for all of your other literature essays on your AP Lit exam and beyond.
That's crazy!
In fact, I even used these templates when I was writing my Lit papers when I was earning my master's degree. One other quick note about the examples you'll see in this video and throughout the rest of our literary argument series. I have a student named Allison who volunteered her work to be the foundational model for everything that you're going to see here. I'm so grateful she was willing to share it with you because it is solid work. And you should also know that she earned a 5 on her Lit exam last year. Okay, so let's write some thesis statements.
Let's get it all!
I'm going to begin by showing you the first easiest thesis template that we are going to use to respond to our prompt. I'd like to remind you that we are going to be using the story of Macbeth to model how we want to respond to the prompt that we're looking at. Here's the thesis template itself. It's about to pop up on your screen. You can find all of the templates and examples from this video on the sheet that's linked up for free in the video description. You've seen the template, but you probably need an example to understand how it really works. Let me walk you through it. First, I'm going to include the genre, title, and author of the work. This part is super easy. You can also feel free to move these 3 pieces around if you see fit. In my case, I'll begin by writing in the play, The Tragedy of Macbeth, William Shakespeare presents. Now, what I put in after the word presents must come from the story itself, and it must respond to the topic of the prompt. I can include common literary terms in this first section after the word presents, but I also don't have to. What's important for this section of the template is that whatever I include in here needs to be something that actually happens in the story. This means I could point to the text in the story to prove that event happened. So I can know that I'm accurately answering the prompt, I'm going to go back to the first conquer question from my prompt breakdown, and I'm going to answer that question in this section of the thesis. My first conquer question is, what is the character's experience with guilt? To answer this, I'm going to identify a character and his or her experience with guilt and give an incredibly concentrated and brief synopsis of how it actually shows up in the story. When this happens, my first sentence of my thesis that responds to this prompt about Macbeth will look like this. In the play, The Tragedy of Macbeth, Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth's ironic shaming of her husband's guilt, her personal nightmares, and her ultimate demise. You may notice that in my example, I have briefly summarized 3 literary moments in the story that I can open up the book and point to. You don't have to have 3 moments in every thesis that you write. You may choose to have 2, you may choose to have 5, or you may only choose to have 1 that you'll explore in detail over multiple paragraphs. But for now, I have 3, and each one will be turned into a particular paragraph as the video series continues. You'll notice my first literary element correlates with the lit term irony. My second element highlights a personal conflict, and my final event details a final outcome, a resolution, if you will. In my thesis, I didn't write Shakespeare presents ironic interactions, Lady Macbeth's internal conflicts, and a resolution, but I could have if I really wanted to include literary terms. The reason I chose not to write like this is because it's a bit simplistic and it's incredibly general and ambiguous. Because good writing is precision writing, I wanted to be as precise about my literary moments and elements as possible. Whether you list out lit terms or literary moments with this part of the template, you just want to make sure that you have an on-topic set of elements that actually happen in the story. One other note, you'll see the word guilt in my first sentence of my thesis. This is important because you can now know that the response is on topic. You are answering the prompt. Now, let's go fill in the second sentence for this first thesis template. In this second sentence, I'm going to articulate the inferences I can make about characters, relationships, conflicts, and/or other plot events based on the actual literary moments that I included in sentence 1. This is where I'm answering the second conquer question that we generated when we broke down the prompt. The question that is, what is the interpretation of the work as a whole? Here's what sentence 2 would look like. These moments highlight Lady Macbeth's inner turmoil caused by her own feelings of inescapable guilt that gnaw at her subconscious. Notice how I've taken the literary moments from the story and have made judgments about how they have affected my interpretation of Lady Macbeth's character. I'm now highlighting that after reading the play, I've been able to interpret that Lady Macbeth is suffering from some inner turmoil due to her own guilt, not just her husband's. So, if I were to put these sentences together, here is what our two-sentence thesis statement would look like based on the template. In the play, The Tragedy of Macbeth, Shakespeare showcases Lady Macbeth's ironic shaming of her husband's guilt, her personal nightmares, and her ultimate demise. These moments highlight Lady Macbeth's inner turmoil caused by her own feelings of inescapable guilt that gnaw at her subconscious. This thesis fully responds to the prompt and all of the questions we created during our prompt breakdown. It identifies a character who feels guilt, it mentions the consequences of the guilt, and it mentions the character's actions and choices. It also generally answers what the character's experience with guilt is and how these experiences influence the interpretation of the work. It succeeds! You'll earn the thesis point on your AP Lit exam, it can guide your paper, and you can produce a strong response to follow just using this particular template. But one thing that this one lacks is a correlation with a thematic understanding, or as I call it in my classroom, a correlation with a universal insight. Including some sort of thematic discovery is not mandated in order to score well on your literary argument response on your AP exam, or any exam or essay for that matter. But you should really consider adding such a statement to your thesis if you can, especially if it's in the directions if it's not for an AP response. Now, I'm not going to spend time in this video discussing how to infer universal insights because I've already done that in a video that looks like this and is linked down below in the description. The description is right underneath the like button and the subscribe button and the channel membership button and the super thanks button. Any of those you can press to assist the Garden of English and help get our content out to more students and teachers who could use the resources that we provide. Anyway, let's look at a thesis template that adds a thematic element. It's going to show right up on your screen. Once again, it may be easier to understand the template with a model. A multi-sentence thesis that adds the universal insight would look like this. In the play, The Tragedy of Macbeth, Shakespeare showcases Lady Macbeth's ironic shaming of her husband's guilt, her personal nightmares, and her ultimate demise. These moments highlight Lady Macbeth's inner turmoil caused by her own feelings of inescapable guilt that gnaw at her subconscious. All of the aforementioned is meant to illustrate that most individuals attempt to run from taking accountability for their actions, but are inevitably put to judgment by an intangible gavel, their own conscience. Notice how the third sentence of my example is entirely universal. It doesn't mention one character or event from Macbeth at all, but it is a presumably true statement that I can infer from the events that I've included in my thesis that come from the play of Macbeth. This universal insight explains why anyone still reads this story even hundreds of years after it was written. Is it true that people try to run from being held accountable? Absolutely. Is it true that most people can't escape their own conscience? Yeah, you bet. Adding the universal insight to your thesis statement does project that you have a stronger understanding of the story that you're writing about. But I want to remind you that it's not entirely necessary to include one to write a good paper unless that's part of the directions, or unless your teacher insists upon it. Then you need to listen to your teacher. I personally require my students to include universal insights in my classroom, but I do let them know that on the AP Lit exam day, they might elect not to, especially depending on time. From this example in the thematic statement, the ideas of accountability and conscience are mentioned, and the ideas of guilt and judgment are implied by the image of the intangible gavel. Thematic statements are easier to write when you consider how a story conveys a message about two or more related ideas. The thematic insight in this thesis includes even more than two. One other quick note before I move on. I do recognize that my example universal insight doesn't entirely follow the thesis template because it starts with the phrase most individuals instead of an actual universal idea. Allison made this choice and I'm using her work as my base model, so I tried to keep it as close as I could. But if you wanted to know what this third sentence might look like if it followed my template to a T, it would read like this. All of the aforementioned is meant to illustrate that inevitable judgment for an individual's poor decisions often doesn't come from external sources, but rather a person's own conscience. This explores the ideas of inevitable judgment, poor decision making, and the conscience. Both the original thematic statement and this sentence mean the same thing, they're just worded differently. What can you learn from this variation? Well, because you are your own writer, if it makes more sense for you to start your universal insight with the phrase most individuals instead of a universal idea, you can. I've included both types of thematic statements on the free template and video document found in the description. Now, let's say you don't like the 3-sentence template here, but you do like the inclusion of the universal insight. Well, we can easily combine the universal insight statement with the second sentence in a template that will look like this. Your new thesis would in turn read like this. In the play, The Tragedy of Macbeth, Shakespeare showcases Lady Macbeth's ironic shaming of her husband's guilt, her personal nightmares, and her ultimate demise. These moments highlight Lady Macbeth's inner turmoil caused by her own feelings of inescapable guilt that gnaw at her subconscious, and ultimately illustrate that most individuals attempt to run from taking accountability for their actions, but are inevitably put to judgment by an intangible gavel, their own conscience. Pretty awesome.
Pretty good.
Now, hopefully these thesis templates are providing you with options to articulate your understandings according to your writing abilities and needs. But there are a few more templates that I would like to share with you. The last two of these are going to be a bit more complex because we're going to take the content and universal insights and combine them into a single, well-punctuated sentence. But the first of these final few templates will combine the sentences, yet it's not going to be that hard. Think back to the first 2-sentence template that I provided just a few minutes ago. It required you to include literary elements from the story that relate to the prompt and the inferences that you could make about the story because of those elements. Instead of articulating these moves as 2 separate sentences like we did before, what we're going to do is we're going to combine them with the subordinating conjunctive phrase in order to. Here's what this template would look like. And here's how a thesis written in this template would read. In the play The Tragedy of Macbeth, Shakespeare showcases Lady Macbeth's ironic shaming of her husband's guilt, her personal nightmares, and her ultimate demise in order to highlight Lady Macbeth's inner turmoil caused by her own feelings of inescapable guilt that gnaw at her subconscious. One thing that I'd like to recognize about combining sentences. When you do this, you want to consider not being overly repetitive. You may notice that in the last thesis I provided, the word guilt shows up twice. This is a good thing because I'm definitely responding to the prompt topic, but because it's in the same sentence, I'm wondering if I can substitute one of the words for a synonym. In this case, the answer is yes. And I could substitute the second instance of the word guilt with the word regret, and this sentence would still work out just fine. Do I have to? No. Can I still score well if I don't? Yep. Should I embrace synonyms to improve my writing? Probably. Now, let's move on to the next single sentence template that actually includes a universal insight as well. This is the same template that can be found in my other thesis video that looks like this and is linked in the description as well. It's right under the link to the Garden of English merch store where you can grab some awesome Garden of English gear that's produced right in my home. Now, here's the template itself. This template is a closed template that provides the exact plot details that your paragraphs will cover, the inferences you'll connect them to, and the universal insight your conclusion will expound upon. When this is well punctuated, this sentence is impressive.
Wow.
But some students find it a bit cumbersome and confusing, so you may not want to include all of this information in one sentence. And that's why I gave you a lot of the prior templates. But here is what a thesis would look like when written with this particular template. In the play The Tragedy of Macbeth, Shakespeare showcases Lady Macbeth's ironic shaming of her husband's guilt, her personal nightmares, and her ultimate demise in order to highlight Lady Macbeth's inner turmoil caused by her own feelings of inescapable regret that gnaw at her subconscious, ultimately illustrating that most individuals attempt to run from taking accountability for their actions, but are inevitably put to judgment by an intangible gavel, their own remorse. Nice. Body paragraph 1 is going to be about Lady McBee's shaming of her husband and how it relates to her own psyche. Body paragraph 2 is going to discuss her nightmares and her own guilt. And body paragraph 3 is going to look at her death in relation to her inner turmoil. The conclusion will discuss the inescapability of a person's inner conscience, and the paper will be great, as you'll see in future videos. Now, there's one more thesis template I have here, and it's actually a little simpler than the one we just looked at, but it's also a bit more complex. That's quite a paradox. Let me show you the template, and then I'll explain what I mean. Here it is. You may notice that in this template, I took out the initial literary elements section. So, this template only reveals the student writer's inferential interpretation of the work as a whole, based on the topic of the prompt, and the student writer's understanding of the reading's thematic insight. Thus, when the student writes this paper, he or she won't be limited to writing about only 3 specific events or elements throughout the essay, because the thesis doesn't include 3 confining points. This template generates what is called an open thesis, and open thesis statements are the most sophisticated, but when constructed poorly, they can actually be the most damaging as well. My student Allison, however, did originally produce her thesis according to this last template, and I want to share it with you here in just a moment. I used her thesis as the base for all of the other examples that I've included, but here is what she originally produced when responding to the prompt during her timed writing when she was in my class last year. In the play, The Tragedy of Macbeth, Shakespeare showcases Lady Macbeth's inner turmoil caused by the inescapable guilt that gnaws at her subconscious, ultimately illustrating that most individuals attempt to run from taking accountability for their actions, but are inevitably put to judgment by an intangible gavel, their conscience. What a great thesis. And she followed it up with an excellent paper that had well-constructed topic sentences, just like the ones that you can learn how to write by watching what's about to pop up on your screen.